D, knight f6, c4, g6, knight f3, bishop g7, g3, short castle, bishop g2, d6, short castle, knight c6, knight c3. There was of course one move with similar ideas like a6 and the move was rook b8 played, but lately happened that it's not the best move, so white can use this weak part. So a6 anyway we have to play. d5, knight a5, so-called Yugoslav variation, knight d2, c5. Well, taking here on c6, of course, it's easy play for black, since they can take simply back with the knight and having normal position. What else we can, for example, here dc5, knight c6, and I mean, just to look at this position, the knight should be somewhere on d4 and for sure not, or at least on f3, not on d2. Another option for him is to go here a3, to try to play against this knight, but after knight d7, opening our bishop on the big diagonal, after knight d7, queen c2, knight a5, attacking already the pawn, so we always pressure on white's position. Knight d1, b5. It's black who starts first, and of course he has the advantage. So let's see the main move and the whole Yugoslav variation, which is queen c2, very solid move, protecting the objects on the c file, the knight on c3 and pawn on c4. Our plan, of course, is if we have this knight on a5, we should go with the plan of b7, b5 playing, creating some pressure on the queen side. If he tries to stop us with a4, then we can go simply e5, b3, b6, and the knight, of course, will come back from b7. From the other hand, after e4, knight e8, knight d1, rook b7, knight e3, bishop goes to h6, and knight goes to g7, followed by f5, and then rook will come to f7, knight, if needed, will come, if not, he will still exercise some pressure on b3. Sometimes it's also useful, especially linked with the pressure of the bishop, and black had even better play in this game. So, main move, it's b3, we go b5, here he has a choice, rook b1 and bishop b2. If bishop b2, first of all, what I want to pay your attention to the fact that this bishop is already under pressure after bc4, bc4, bishop h6. But we already always have in mind one of the ideas is to take on b2. I mean, to take on d2, to take on c4, take on b2. So we already start to attack his pieces. For example, knight cb1. Such an interesting move, defending the knight on d2. Then again, as in the previous example, we provoke e4. It's always, many times it's useful. Bishop d7, bishop c3, and knight goes to g4. Well, beside the fact that we want to bring the knight to e5, another idea can be also sometimes f5. Let's say if he goes h3, knight e5, knight a3, and here I will introduce you extremely typical idea for the whole line, this sacrifice rook b4. We will see it many times in the other lines. For example, if instead of 17 h3 he would go here rook e1, again we always have in mind this typical idea. After rook e1, first we go f5. Let's say he would take on f5, bishop f5, queen a4, and now out of a sudden again this rook b4 is very strong, because if he takes, take, queen b4, queen c7. What I like about black's position, it's really very strong. I mean, look at the pieces. The bishop is in the play. Knight is targeting h2 and f2. The queen is ready to get to attack on f2 as well, but also is attacking on c4. They simply, practically, it's very difficult to find a useful move. Next move already for sure we will do something like knight f2 or something, because also the rook is very active. I mean, this is excellent position for black, and it was thanks to the clear plan what black had. This knight g4 and f5 connected with the other pieces as well. So knight cb1, definitely it's slow and it's passive. So here we can overtake the initiative. He can also play here f4 in order to stop our bishop, to close it. Then e5, starting the fight for the squares. Rook a1, this is typical move. So now maybe he wants to play knight d1 in order to start the pressure on the big diagonal. So exactly here, after rook e1, we already start the concrete play. We take on f4. First we play here knight h5, e3, and bishop g7. Come back. So you see, for a while we stopped his pieces. For example, here e4, it's not the best idea for him, because for sure we will have some attack with knight bishop d4, queen h4, and knight g3 check mate. Well, so after bishop g7 he has to defend himself with knight d1, but then another provocation comes into the picture with bishop f5. Again, he cannot play e4 because of same rook b2, bishop d4, typical idea, so he has to put the bishop to e4. Then we have this easy tactics like bishop b2, knight b2, rook b2, queen b2, and knight c4. And after knight c4, bishop e4, you can check the games played on this position, but actually this already is very strong compensation. Let's say after knight d2, bishop d5, we have already 2 pawns for the exchange, and also his king is weakened. I mean, for sure we have strong compensation. So that's about how to play on f4, e5, rook e1. I mean, we take on f4. If after, and the same we would do on king h1, we would take on f4 and play knight h5. Let's see if he takes on e5. This is a good question, always what we do. In this case we don't take, of course, we don't spoil our structure here. We play knight g4, we play with the pieces. So after knight ce4, already we don't give this check for a while. Yeah, we don't play knight d3, we simply take our time for playing d5, and later already all the threats are coming into the picture. Main line should be here after e5, the take en passant, d takes e6, bishop e6, and knight d5. In this case, we again do sacrifice our bishop, but this is temporary sacrifice. Rook b2, queen b2, and bishop g7. Because after queen a3, for example, we would take on c4, another tactical motive, always hanging. I mean, our knight, many times he jumps into the play. Unexpected. Knight c4, knight d5, rook c1, and knight b4, followed by d5. We have again an excellent compensation here. So that was all about this move when he puts the rook to b1, bishop to b2. And we saw that this was a nice target for our rook. In many lines we use this rook takes b2 exchange sacrifice. Even he puts the bishop to c3 or a3, sometimes also we use the same sacrifice, rook b4. This is really a strong one. We have to examine also, beside bishop b2 here, the main move is rook b1. On rook b1 we should also go with e5. So here he has several options, and he has to decide what he will do with the pawn structure. Of course, taking on e6 he is already not that strong, because we can take this bishop, attacking on c4. So let's see if he takes on b5, and again goes for this plan with b4. After b4 we take, rook b4, we pin first the knight, and let's say bishop b2. Another provocation comes, bishop f5. I'm afraid after e4 we will take this knight on d5, because it's double pin. The knight is pinned and the pawn is pinned. So if he cannot go, so after queen c7, of course already, after queen c1, of course already we can continue very comfortably our development with the better for black position. On queen c7, he can also play here e4 himself, but then after bishop d7, I prefer to put the bishop on d7. In some position we can also play bishop a6, but bishop d7 looks like a more natural move. Queen b2, queen c5, a3, rook f8, knight b3, and queen c3, and some equal play. Well, that's about this type of position when they take on b5 and play b4. So in this case we play on this open file, and many times we either develop a bishop on a5 or to d7. He can try immediately after e5 to play here b4. In this case we also take on b4 and play queen c7, transposing the game into the previous line. If after e5 he goes a3, then same typical idea which we already saw, bishop f5, e4, bishop d7. And after cbab b4, we can even, of course we can take on b4, but better is here to go knight b7 and to control better the squares. I mean, it's like a good Ruy Lopez for black. Main line, of course, after e5 it's bishop b2. The difference with the previous line, of course, is because the rook is on b1 already. So the takes on b2, they might work, but not that clear. Sorry. So bishop b2, bishop h6. So the play starts, the pressure starts. We attack the targets on d2, on c4. There is a pressure on d file. So white has to react somehow. e3 is the most natural way, but in this case we can continue with bishop f5. Knight e4, knight e4, knight e4. And you remember we said that already, so sometimes this exchange of one knight is favorable to us. In this case we see this bishop doesn't do any work, and we succeeded with exchanging the knight, so we should come back and in order to oppose our bishop to this diagonal. Bishop c3, queen c7, connecting the rooks. It's also important sometimes, especially in the view of opening the b file. Bishop d2. We say that knight goes usually, the only way to go for here back is to b7 to d8. Yeah, okay, that's a very close position. I think knight d8, we can provoke him here for b4, and then we will come back and defend on c5. So I mean, for sure we will take this the knight, even we will give this bishop to e4, and we will have a very comfortable situation. Well, that's about equal. Here white played quite accurately, so that's why he didn't get into all these typical tactical ideas, usually what we have with black. So after f4, of course, it's more ambitious. This move, it's more ambitious, but at the same time it allows us to show our tactical skills. After bc4, ef4, sorry, bc4, ef4, gf4, we play bishop g7. Again, this bishop is already closed on. There is nothing to do for him on this diagonal. So we come back to the main diagonal, where all these events will happen. And of course, we keep in mind the moves like knight g4 and bishop g4 and rook b takes b2 and knight takes c4. I mean, all these tactical ideas are in the air. So let's say he goes knight d1. Then we take rook b2 already, as promised, as announced. Rook b2 and knight g4. Let's say h3, bishop d4 check, king h1. Sometimes we are not very proud, and I mean we are just happy with taking back the exchange. It's also good, because here after knight f6, king h1, knight h5, e4, queen h4, we have enough targets on this side, on the king side. So that's about on bishop g7. If he plays rook d1, the knight d1, then we take on b2. If he can save his bishop by playing bishop a1, and it looks like I mean we don't have this rook b2 anymore, but we have other things. Rook b1, queen b1, and knight g4. So the threat is clear. Bishop d4, and sometimes maybe queen h4 can come after some bishop d4, knight h2 also, queen h4. Knight d1, nice check, bishop d4, changing the structure. Bishop d4, cd4. So we have already some squares additional. Maybe even for this knight, the knight can come to c5, but only thing not to lose immediately the pawn. Queen d3, queen b6, holding. Knight f3, bishop d7. Yeah, we gain some time for attacking this pawn on c4. And okay, I would say this about equal. So the main line after bishop g7 and the last line in this chapter, it's h3 in order to stop in another way this jump to g4. Then we already put the knight to h5, knight ce4. Again we take on b2 with the rook. Rook takes b2 and intermediate move f5. First we check his documents. After f5, knight c3, bishop d4 check, king h2, queen h4. Again, as we said, the attack is very strong, and the price for the exchange is too high, they paid. Well, let's conclude this chapter to see what are our ideas. So, first of all, this move with queen c2 is very solid for white, and we have to be precise in the first moves after that. So we have to go with b5, and then we usually what we do, we exercise a pressure on the knight on d2. After e5 we play bishop h6 and provoke either f4 when it gets very sharp, but this squares, weakened square e3, the diagonal d4 g1, the king after ef gf, the king on g1. All these factors allows us to sacrifice an exchange and to launch a strong attack against the king. Normally after f4 we come back with the bishop, after e4 g4, bishop g7 to the big diagonal. In cases when he is let's say he's trying to save the bishop on a1, then we also correct our fire after taking on b1, and then we have, for example, one line like knight g4, bishop g7, bishop d4, settling the bishop to d4. In all cases, black has a good play, just to remember the main ideas, and I think the line is good for black.